My name is Rachel Collins. I was 34 years old the night my mother called me at 1:47 in the morning to inform me I was permitted to attend my own sister's wedding rehearsal dinner under one condition. "Don't mention the fire department," she said. "No hello. No how are you. Just directives, like I was still 16 and too young to have opinions." Her reasoning was simple. My sister Emma's fiancé had a father, a retired fire chief with 35 years of service, and my mother was terrified I'd embarrass the family the way she claimed I always did. So I sat in the dark of my hotel room, phone pressed to my ear, and said, "Understood." I hung up. I looked at the dress uniform hanging in the closet beside the navy gown I'd bought for that dinner. My Class A uniform, captain's bars on the collar, 2 valor commendations on the ribbon rack. My mother didn't know, or didn't care, that the fire chief she was so desperate to impress had personally signed my promotion recommendations 6 years earlier at Station 47. She didn't know because she'd never asked. What happened at that dinner table is why I'm sharing this story today. This is the channel where we talk about family secrets, broken trust, and the moments people finally stand up for who they really are. If Rachel's story feels familiar, drop a comment and make sure to subscribe. Let me rewind to that phone call. I'd driven 9 hours from Pittsburgh to Richmond, Virginia that afternoon. 9 hours of highway and gas station coffee, just to sit at a table with people who'd made it clear I was an afterthought. I checked into a comfort inn near the highway around 10 p.m., showered, laid out my clothes, and set my alarm for 05:30 out of habit. Then at 1:47 a.m., my phone lit up. "Mom," I answered, because when your mother calls in the middle of the night, you assume the worst. Nobody was dead. "Tomorrow," she said. "You can join the rehearsal dinner, but I need you to be careful." Her voice had that specific edge, the one she uses when she's been rehearsing her lines. "Careful about what?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. Her fiancé's father is a retired fire chief. A real one. "Just don't bring up your fire station stuff. It makes people uncomfortable." Like I always do, as if there were a folder somewhere of every disappointment I'd caused her. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed in my t-shirt and sweats, phone warm against my ear, and I said, "Okay." She hung up first, she always does. I set the phone on the nightstand and looked across the room at the closet. My Class A uniform hung on the left, the navy gown hung on the right. 2 versions of me in a budget hotel room in the city where I grew up and never quite fit. 16 years earlier, I was standing in our kitchen on Kensington Avenue with an application to the Fire Academy on the counter and my mother's face pale as the tile floor. My father had been gone 3 years by then, cancer at 54, taken too fast. Mom had started a small catering business out of our kitchen. Trays of sandwiches and finger foods lined up on the counter next to my paperwork. She needed me to stay. Emma was 16 and had no interest in anything that wasn't on her phone. "I raised you to help," she said, "not to leave." I tried to explain. The fire department wasn't about running away. It was about building something that was mine. Something nobody could take away. She didn't hear it. The morning I left for the academy, I put my duffel in the trunk of a friend's car at 5 a.m. She stood on the porch in her robe. She didn't hug me. She said, "If you go through that door, don't expect me to be here when you come back." I went through the door. She was still there, but she wasn't really there. Over the next 16 years, every family gathering felt like a performance review I'd already failed. Martha Collins. That's my mother. Martha. She treated me like a guest she was tolerating. Polite, distant, cold in ways that left no evidence. Emma learned the lesson early. She stayed close, she answered every call, and in our family's arithmetic, proximity equaled love, and distance equaled betrayal. I didn't leave to hurt her. I left because staying would have suffocated everything I was becoming. Morning, 5:30 a.m. alarm. 20 minutes of stretching on the hotel carpet because the fitness center wasn't open yet. Black coffee from the lobby machine. A call to my station back in Pittsburgh. Shift schedules for the upcoming month. Nothing urgent, but I checked in because that's how I'm wired. Routine keeps me steady. Routine is the thing that holds me together when everything else threatens to fall apart. At 8:45, my phone buzzed. "Emma, a text. Dinner tonight at the Jefferson, 7 p.m. Dress nice. And Rach, just keep it low-key about the fire stuff. It makes his family nervous." I read it twice. The fire stuff. 16 years of service, 2 valor commendations, and a leadership record that had me on the shortlist for battalion chief. And my sister called it the fire stuff like it was a hobby, like I collected antique axes. I didn't reply. I opened the closet instead. My Class A uniform on the left, the navy gown on the right. I reached for the gown, not because I was ashamed of the uniform, I've never been ashamed of it, but because tonight was Emma's dinner, not mine. Wearing my Class A to someone else's celebration would make me the story. And that wasn't the point. The point was seeing my sister's face before my next rotation in 45 days. That was the only reason I'd driven 9 hours. Around 10, another text came through. Unknown number. I opened it. The text was from Derek Hayes, Emma's fiancé. He'd gotten my number from her. Hi Rachel, so excited to finally meet you. Emma's told me a lot. Just a heads up, my dad is pretty traditional, so try to keep things light and fun, okay? He's not great with heavy topics at dinner. I stared at the screen. Emma's told me a lot. That sentence carried weight I could measure. The question was what exactly she'd told him. I called Emma. She picked up on the second ring, voice bright and rehearsed. Hey, what's up? What exactly did you tell Derek about me? A pause. The kind that tells you someone is deciding how much truth to spend. Just the basics. That you've been in Pittsburgh, doing your own thing. You know how mom is. Doing my own thing? I repeated. You told him I've been doing my own thing. Look, it's just easier this way. His dad's a fire chief, Rachel. A real one. He doesn't need to hear about. She stopped herself. But not fast enough. About what, Emma? Silence. The highway kind. Long and flat, with nothing on either side. Just be normal tonight, please. She hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed and set the phone down carefully, the way you handle something you're trying not to break. My sister didn't just want me to be quiet. She was embarrassed by me, not by anything I'd done, by everything I'd become. A real one, she'd said. As if there were another kind, the Jefferson stood on a corner in downtown Richmond. Brick facade, white columns, the kind of restaurant where the valet knows your name if you come often enough. Private dining room on the second floor. Table for 16. I arrived at 6:55, 5 minutes early, because the fire service trains that into you and civilian life never takes it out. Martha was already there. She stood at the far end of the table arranging flowers in a low crystal vase, her back to the door. She wore a burgundy dress and gold earrings. When she turned and saw me, her eyes went from my shoes to my hair in one sweep, like a chief inspecting a rookie. At least you look presentable for once, she said. No hello? No, you look nice. Just a grade. Barely passing, Emma and Derek arrived a few minutes later. Emma was petite, blonde, smiling the way people smile when they're hoping something goes right. She crossed the room and took my hand. Oh, you must be the sister. Derek told me you're a firefighter or something, right? Or something. Like it was a guess, like she'd never been certain. I smiled. Something like that. Martha directed me to my seat, the far end of the table. 7 chairs from the head where a place card read Chief Hayes retired. I looked at that name and my pulse ticked up one notch. Arthur Hayes. I knew that name. Before the Hayes side arrived, Martha pulled me into the hallway outside the private room. The carpet was hunter green. The lighting was dim and golden. She leaned close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same brand she'd worn since I was 15. I need you to listen to me, she said. The Hayes family thinks you're in hospitality, event planning or something. I told them you manage a venue in Pittsburgh. If they ask, just nod. I blinked. You told them I manage a venue? It's close enough to what you do. You manage schedules or whatever it is. I'm a captain, Mom. I manage a fire company. I've been in command of Station 47 for 3 years. She waved her hand, a small dismissive motion like she was brushing away a fly. Same idea, different words. Just don't correct me in there. She turned and walked back into the dining room. I stood in that hallway for maybe 20 seconds. I'd known she minimized my career. I'd expected that. But this was something else entirely. She hadn't downplayed what I did. She'd replaced it. She'd built a whole other Rachel, one without the helmet, without the rank, without the valor commendations, without the lives I'd helped save. And she'd handed that version to the family of a retired fire chief. She'd erased me. And she'd done it so smoothly, so completely, that I realized this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment lie. She'd been telling it long enough to believe it herself. I walked back in, sat down, placed my napkin across my lap, and waited. She didn't just ask me to be quiet. She asked me to be someone else. She'd built an entire version of me. A version without the uniform, without the service, without anything I'd earned. If you've ever been erased by someone who is supposed to be proud of you, stay with me. This story is about to turn. The front door of the restaurant opened at 7:12. I heard it from my seat, the creak of the hinge. Then a voice I recognized the way you recognize a song from the first 2 notes. Deep, measured. The kind of voice that spent 35 years giving orders to rooms full of people who listen the first time. Chief Arthur Hayes walked into the private dining room with his wife Carol, a half step behind him. He wore a charcoal blazer over a white shirt. No uniform, but the way he moved, shoulders back, chin level, eyes scanning the room left to right before he committed to a single step. That was uniform enough. Carol was elegant, silver hair, pearl earrings, the calm smile of a woman who'd hosted hundreds of fire department functions and never once lost her composure. Martha was on her feet before they'd cleared the doorway. Chief Hayes, what an honor. Too loud, too eager. The chief smiled politely. Art, please, I'm retired. He shook Derek's hand. Carol kissed her son's cheek. He said something warm to Emma that I couldn't hear. Then he looked around the table. His gaze moved across the faces. Martha, Derek's college friend, Emma's cousin, and stopped on me. 1 second. Maybe 2. His brow creased. A micro-expression. The kind you learn to read when your job depends on reading people who aren't trying to be read. I knew him. Pittsburgh 6 years ago. He'd stood at a podium and called my name. I'd marched forward, saluted, and he'd handed me my promotion certificate. But I didn't say a word. I nodded. He nodded back. Martha took his arm and steered him toward the head of the table, and the moment passed. Almost appetizers came out. Shrimp cocktail, bruschetta. The kind of food you eat with your fingers while pretending not to notice the tension. Martha ran the conversation the way she ran her catering events. Tight schedule, controlled portions, no room for surprises. She talked about her catering business, the new farmers market on Grace Street, the historic homes tour. Derek nodded along and added color where she left gaps. Emma smiled and touched his arm. It was a well-rehearsed production, and I was the audience member who hadn't been given a program. Carol Hayes sat across from me, 2 seats to my left. She watched Martha with the quiet patience of someone who's attended enough dinners to know when the host is performing. Then she turned to me. And what does your other daughter do, Martha? The question floated across the table like a paper airplane. Light, simple, impossible to dodge. Martha didn't miss a beat. Oh, Rachel works in event management, venue coordination. She's been in Pittsburgh for a while now. You know how that industry is. I heard the words come out of my mother's mouth, and I felt each one land like a small, precise cut. Event management, venue coordination, that industry. I looked down at my plate. The shrimp sat curled on its bed of ice, pink and still. From the head of the table, Chief Hayes set down his fork. He looked at me, then at Martha, then back at me. He picked up his napkin, dabbed the corner of his mouth, and said nothing. Derek jumped in. So, Emma, tell everyone about the band you found for the reception. The subject changed. But the chief's eyes didn't. Carol wasn't the type to let a thread drop. Somewhere between the appetizer plates being cleared and the entrees arriving, she turned to me again with the easy warmth of a woman who'd spent 3 decades making young firefighters' spouses feel welcome at station dinners. Event management, she said. That must keep you busy. Where do you work? I weighed my options. I could lie, which would make me complicit. I could tell the truth, which would detonate my mother's entire fiction. Or I could walk the razor edge between the two. I'm based in Pittsburgh, I said. It's fast-paced work. A lot of coordination. Pittsburgh. That's lovely. What kind of events? Government operations, actually. The word government landed softly, but it landed. Carol's eyebrows lifted a fraction. Martha's hand appeared from nowhere, reaching across the table for the bread basket, angling her body between Carol and me. Rachel, would you pass the bread? I passed the bread. Carol let it go, but Chief Hayes didn't. I saw him from the corner of my eye. He'd set down his water glass and was looking at me the way a man looks at a puzzle he's 90% sure he's solved. Government operation, Pittsburgh. Coordination, 3 data points. He tilted his head slightly, just a degree, and I watched recognition assemble itself behind his eyes the way a storm builds on the horizon. Slow, certain, and impossible to stop once it starts. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, held it low under the table. Scrolled through something. I didn't look directly, but I could feel it. He was checking. Main course. Pan-seared trout for most of the table, steak for Derek, who'd never once eaten fish without complaining. Emma, seated across from me, had been quiet for most of the meal, watching, absorbing, filing. Now she leaned forward, elbows off the table the way a chief's daughter would, and said, So what exactly do you do? Like day to day? I glanced at Martha. She was mid-sip, but her eyes locked onto mine over the rim of her glass, a warning, clear as a traffic light. I looked back at Emma. I make sure people have what they need, I said. Equipment, supplies, support in situations where those things aren't easy to get. Emma smiled. Oh, like event planning for remote venues. Derek jumped in before I could answer. Something like that. I picked up my fork, set it down, picked it up again. Something like that, I said. Under the table, my right hand drifted to the pocket of my dress. The fabric was thin enough that I could feel the edge of the challenge coin through it. Heavy, round, cool against my thigh. Chief Hayes had handed it to me the same day he'd signed my promotion. It was a tradition. You don't buy a challenge coin, you earn one. Or someone who matters gives you one. I carried it the way some people carry a photograph. Not to show anyone, just to know it was there. Across the table, the chief was looking at his phone again. This time he wasn't scrolling. He was staring at something on the screen. His jaw tightened just slightly, just enough for someone trained to notice. Between the entree and dessert, Carol excused herself. Martha followed the way she always followed anyone she wanted to manage. I watched them disappear toward the restroom and knew exactly what was about to happen. Martha would steer, Carol would listen, and somewhere in that conversation, my mother would reinforce the fiction she'd constructed. I found out later from Carol herself what was said. Carol had leaned against the marble counter and mentioned casually, "Your daughter seems very measured, very composed for someone in event management." Martha had adjusted her earring in the mirror. "She's always been quiet. Not much ambition, honestly. Emma's the one with drive." Carol had pushed gently. "She mentioned government operations. Is she with a venue on a military base, maybe?" And my mother, the woman who'd spent 30 years feeding people in Richmond, the woman who made her own pie crust and ironed her tablecloths, had looked Carol Hayes straight in the face and said, "Something like that. She's never been very clear about what she does. You know how some kids are." Carol nodded, smiled politely, but something didn't fit, and Carol Hayes had spent 3 decades as a fire department spouse. She could smell a briefing that didn't add up the way a baker smells when the bread's gone wrong. When they walked back, Carol leaned close to the chief's ear. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw his face. He closed his eyes for 1 second, opened them, looked directly at me, and I knew he wasn't guessing anymore. Here's what Chief Hayes had found on his phone. I didn't learn this until weeks later when he told me himself over coffee at his home in Alexandria. But I'll tell you now because the timing matters. Somewhere between Carol's first question and Martha's hallway lie, the chief had opened his photo gallery and typed a single word into the search bar. Collins. The phone returned 7 results, all from the same day. The promotion ceremony at Station 47, 6 years prior. In the first photo, the chief stood at a podium reading a citation. In the second, he was shaking a young firefighter's hand. In the third, the one that mattered, he was handing a promotion certificate to Captain Rachel Collins. My face was in 3/4 profile. Hair pulled tight, eyes forward, shoulders square. He zoomed in, then he looked up from his phone and looked at me. The same woman sitting at the end of a dinner table in a navy gown being introduced as a venue coordinator who'd been drifting. Same cheekbones, same posture, same stillness under pressure. He told me later that his first feeling wasn't anger, it was confusion. He couldn't understand why a mother would erase her daughter's service. In his world, the world of fire department families, of shift schedules and emergency calls and station dinners and line-of-duty funerals, a child who serves is a child you brag about. You put the sticker on the car, you frame the promotion photo, you tell every stranger at the grocery store, you don't pretend she manages a venue. He put the phone face down on the table. He straightened his napkin. He looked at Carol. She looked back. Something passed between them. The kind of communication that takes 30 years of marriage to develop and 0 words to execute. Then he waited, because a chief knows when to act and when to let the moment find its own shape. Dessert plates were coming out. Chocolate torte with raspberry coulis. Martha stood up and walked the length of the table toward my end. She passed behind Derek's chair, behind Emma's cousin, behind the empty seat where Carol's coat hung. She stopped beside me, bent down, and spoke close to my ear. Her breath smelled like white wine. "You're doing fine," she said. "Just keep your head down through the toast and we're done." There it was again. Keep your head down. The same instruction, the same leash. "I haven't said a word, Mom." "Good, that's all I'm asking." I looked at her, really looked. She was 62 years old and her makeup was perfect and her gold earrings were straight and her hands were shaking. Not a lot, just at the fingertips. Like a person holding something heavy and pretending it's light. "No," I said quietly. "That's not all you're asking me to not exist." Her chin lifted. "Don't be dramatic." She walked back to her seat. I watched her go. She smoothed her skirt as she sat down and picked up her fork and cut a precise triangle from her torte and placed it in her mouth. And it was the single most controlled performance I'd ever seen from a woman, whose control was the only thing keeping her together. And I realized something I should have realized years earlier. My silence wasn't politeness. It wasn't respect. It was complicity. Every time I kept my mouth shut, I helped her maintain a lie. Every quiet dinner, every nodded confirmation, every something like that. I'd been an accomplice in my own erasure, but I still didn't act. Because this dinner was Emma's, not mine. That restraint felt noble at the time. It was also the last excuse I'd ever make for her. Derek seized the lull between dessert and coffee to make his pitch. I could see it coming. The way he adjusted his tie. The way he leaned toward Chief Hayes's end of the table like a man angling for a handshake. "Sir, I don't know if Emma mentioned. I'm starting an insurance agency here in Richmond," Derek said. "We're specializing in coverage for first responders. Life insurance, disability, retirement planning. It's a growing market." The chief listened. He was good at listening. 35 years of command teaches you to let people talk long enough to tell you who they really are. "That's a worthy cause," the chief said. "First responders are underserved." Derek beamed. "Exactly. And that's why I'd love to connect with some of your colleagues, if you have anyone in mind who might benefit from." "How much do you know about first responder life, Derek?" The question was quiet, almost gentle, but it stopped Derek cold. "Well, I've done my research. Read a lot of case studies." "Research," the chief said. He nodded slowly. Then he looked at me, not a glance, a look, the kind that carries a sentence inside it. He looked at the woman who had led a fire company through structure fires, who had earned 2 valor commendations, who had served under his command, and then he looked at the man who wanted to sell those same first responders insurance policies. He looked back at Derek. "Research is a good start," he said evenly. "Experience is better." Derek laughed nervously. The table moved on, but the chief's point had been made, and everyone who was paying attention had heard it, including me. When the table rearranged itself for coffee, chairs scooting, people swapping seats to chat, Carol Hayes moved next to me. She did it casually, the way a seasoned fire department spouse does everything, with purpose disguised as warmth. She stirred her coffee once, twice, and said, "You said government operation and coordination, and you sit like someone who's been told to sit up straight 10,000 times." She paused. "Are you a firefighter, Rachel?" I held her gaze. She had kind eyes and a jaw that didn't quit. I'd seen that look on the faces of 100 fire department spouses. Women who'd held families together through shift schedules and emergencies and middle-of-the-night calls. Women who knew what service cost because they'd paid the bill too. "Ma'am," I said, "I'm not going to lie to you at your son's engagement dinner." "Then don't. I'm a captain, Pittsburgh Fire Department." Carol set her coffee cup down carefully, like she was afraid she might drop it. "You're active?" "Yes, ma'am. And your family introduced you as event management?" I said it flat. No sarcasm, no bitterness. Just the fact laid on the table, the way you lay out a hand of cards when you've already decided to fold, and you just want everyone to see what you were holding. Carol's hand went to her chest. She looked across the room at Martha, who was laughing at something Emma's cousin had said. Then she looked back at me. "Does Art know? I think he's figuring it out." She stood up, squeezed my shoulder once, walked to the chief's side. I watched her lean down and whisper something into his ear. Whatever Carol said, it took about 4 seconds. The chief listened without moving. Then he set down his coffee cup, folded his napkin, placed it beside his plate, and stood. "I'd like to propose a toast before we wrap up the evening," he said. The room went quiet. Not the polite kind, the real kind. The kind where forks stop midair and conversations die between syllables. Martha smiled. I could see it from 6 seats away. The smile she reserved for moments she'd been engineering all night. The chief was about to bless the engagement. He was about to say something gracious about Derek and Emma and the future. This was her moment, the one that made the lying worth it. "I'd like to start," the chief said, with something unexpected. He stood with his glass, and I could feel every pair of eyes in the room shift. Martha was smiling. She thought this was her moment, the chief blessing her daughter's future. She had no idea that the man she'd spent all evening trying to impress already knew the truth. And what he did next, I still think about every single day. The chief held his glass at chest height. "Not raised yet. That's a fire service tell. You don't raise the glass until you're ready for people to drink." He wasn't ready. "I've spent 35 years in the fire service," he said. His voice carried the room without effort. And in that time, I've learned that you can tell everything about a family by watching how they treat each other when they think no one important is watching. He let that settle. Martha's smile held, but something behind it shifted. Derek, Emma, he looked at them. Warmth in his eyes, genuine and practiced. I'm proud of you both. Marriage is like a planning. It requires sacrifice. And above all, it requires honesty. He said the word honesty the way a judge says guilty, with finality, with weight, and without any particular interest in debate. Tonight, the chief continued, I'd like to talk about honesty. Martha's smile flickered, just the corners, a micro-adjustment like a pilot correcting for wind shear. The chief set his glass down. He pushed his chair back and he began to walk, not toward Derek and Emma, not toward the head of the table. He walked slowly, deliberately down the length of the table, past Derek's college friend, past Emma's cousin, past the empty dessert plates and the coffee cups and the crumpled napkins. Toward the end, toward me, each step registered. Martha turned in her seat, tracking him. Art, she said, her voice one octave higher than it had been. The kids are at the other end of the table. He didn't stop. 5 steps. 6, 7. The room shrank with each one. I could feel my pulse in my throat, not from fear, from recognition. This was the moment, the one I hadn't planned, hadn't engineered, hadn't asked for, but the one I'd earned simply by showing up and telling the truth to the one person who'd bothered to ask. He stopped directly in front of me. I looked up. He looked down. We held eye contact for 3 full seconds, the length of a salute, the length of a breath you take before you step through a door. Under the table, my hand found the challenge coin in my pocket. I pressed my thumb against the Maltese cross on its face. Hello, the chief said. His voice was gentle, but it carried to every corner of the room. I'm surprised to see you here. Good evening, Chief, I said. Quiet, steady, the voice I use when it matters. He nodded once, then louder. Loud enough for Martha, for Emma, for Derek, for every person at that table. Who are you to them? The question detonated silently. The light arrives before the sound, and for a fraction of a second, everything is perfectly still. Every head turned. Martha was half out of her chair. She's my daughter, Art. She works in. The chief raised one hand. Palm open, fingers straight, the command gesture, universal, unmistakable. Martha stopped. Captain, the chief said, looking at me. The word landed on the table like a dropped glass. Would you state your name and unit for everyone at this table? I stood up, chair back, shoulders square, nodded attention. I wasn't in uniform, but close enough that every person at that table could feel the difference between someone who'd learned to stand in a dining room and someone who'd learned to stand on a fire ground. Captain Rachel Collins, I said. Station 47, Pittsburgh Fire Department. The silence was total. Not uncomfortable silence. Not awkward silence, the kind of silence that happens when the floor of a room shifts and nobody knows where the walls are anymore. Emma looked at Derek, her mouth open. No words. Derek looked at Martha. Martha looked at the tablecloth. The chief turned to face the table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I signed this woman's promotion to captain 6 years ago, he said. I recommended her for 2 valor commendations. I've reviewed her incident reports. I know for a fact she led a company into a structure fire on Carson Street that saved 6 people, the same night she was supposed to be at a family dinner. He paused. Let it register. And tonight, he said. Her own family introduced her to me as a venue coordinator. The word venue cracked open like an egg against a counter edge, clean, final, and impossible to put back together. I could feel the air in the room rearrange itself. The chief's friends looked at Martha. Emma's cousin looked at Derek. Carol looked at me with an expression that was equal parts fury and heartbreak. And Martha. My mother, Martha Collins, 62 years old, catering business owner, gold earring wearing, perfume scented, trembling fingered. Martha sat frozen in her chair with her mouth slightly open, and nothing for the first time in her life had to say. The dam broke in slow motion. Martha stood, her chair scraped against the hardwood. A sound like a nail on slate. Art, I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said. I never said. I just simplified things for conversation. You know how it is at dinner parties, people don't want to hear about. Simplified, the chief said. He didn't look at her. He was still facing the table. Mrs. Collins, you told my wife your daughter doesn't have a career. You said she's been drifting. Carol spoke for the first time, quiet, precise. Those were her exact words, Martha. Not much ambition. Those were the words she used. Martha's eyes went to Emma, looking for backup. Looking for the daughter who always stayed, who always agreed, who always carried her bags. Emma was staring at her hands. Her phone sat face up on the table. The last text she'd sent me was still visible on the screen. Please don't make this weird. She couldn't look at me. Martha's voice cracked, not from tears, from pressure, like a pipe that's been holding too much for too long. You don't understand our family. Art. Rachel left us. She chose to leave when I needed her most. She chose the fire department over her own mother. She was shaking now. Her composure, the thing she'd built her whole identity around, was peeling away in sheets. And under it was something raw and old and much more honest than anything she'd said all evening. But she didn't know how to stop. She never had. The chief looked at me. Captain, would you like to say something? I stood up again. I'd sat back down at some point. Instinct, maybe. Or habit. I stood and I looked at the table. At Emma, whose engagement dinner had just become something else entirely. At Derek, who still couldn't meet my eyes. At Carol, who had tears running down her face without making a sound. At the chief, who stood beside me like a witness at a hearing. Then at Martha. I joined the fire service at 18, I said. My voice was level, clear. The voice I use when I'm briefing a crew. When every word has to carry its own weight because there's no room for filler. I earned my certification through the academy at 22. I've responded to structure fires, vehicle rescues, medical emergencies. I've led companies into burning buildings. I've sat with families who lost everything. I've held the hand of a child who couldn't find her mother. I paused, not for drama, for breath. Mom told you I manage a venue. She told you I've been drifting. She's been telling people that story for 16 years. To neighbors, to Emma's friends, to you. I looked at Martha. I didn't come here tonight to correct you, Mom. I came here because Emma's my sister, and I wanted to see her before my next rotation in 45 days. That's it. That's the only reason I drove 9 hours. I sat down. I placed my hands on the table, palms flat, fingers still. Done. Martha was leaning against the back of her chair like it was the only thing holding her upright. Her mouth moved. Nothing came out. She looked the way a building looks a half second before it drops. Still standing, but empty of everything that held it together. Martha walked out of the dining room, not dramatically, not with a door slam. She just stood up, pressed her napkin to the table, and walked out. I followed, not to fight, not to finish her off, because I saw something in her face I hadn't seen in 16 years. Fear, not the kind she performed. The theatrical worry about napkin folds and seating charts. Real fear, the kind that lives under everything else. She was in the hallway, leaning against the wall near the restroom door. Her hands were trembling again. This time, she wasn't hiding it. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph, wallet-sized, laminated, edges soft from years of handling. I knew the photo before I saw the face. I'd seen it once before, years ago, in a drawer she thought I didn't know about. Her mother, my grandmother, a young woman in a nurse's uniform, hair pinned back, looking at the camera with an expression that was half smile, half departure. She left when I was 11, Martha said. Her voice was stripped down to something I barely recognized. Said she needed to find herself, moved to Norfolk, took a nursing job. Never came back, never called on birthdays, never explained. She touched the photograph with her thumb. She looked just like you when she said it. The same eyes, the same certainty. She paused. When you joined the fire department, I saw her face in yours, like the door was already closing. So you made sure I had nothing to come back to, I said. She didn't answer. She just stood there holding the photograph of a woman who left, raised by a woman who couldn't forgive leaving, raising a daughter she punished for the same sin. I walked back inside. When I sat back down, the chief was standing at the head of the table again. He'd waited, not out of patience, out of precision. He knew exactly what he was doing. I'd like to finish my toast, he said. Nobody argued. Nobody moved. Martha came back in and sat down. She didn't look at anyone. She looked at the tablecloth the way a person looks at a document they know they've signed wrong. I said that marriage requires honesty, the chief continued. So does family. And tonight I've learned that this family has a daughter who has served her community with distinction and a mother who erased her service to impress people she barely knows. The sentence landed like a gavel, clean, final, precise. Martha flinched. A full-body flinch, the kind you can't fake and can't hide. Emma was gripping the edge of the table with both hands, knuckles white, jaw locked. Derek looked at Emma, and it was the kind of look that asks a question no one wants to answer. The only embarrassment I see at this table, the chief said, is a mother who erased her own daughter's service. He said it calmly, the way a man says something he's been thinking for 2 hours and has decided to say exactly once. He picked up his glass. To Derek and Emma, he said, "May your marriage be built on truth even when the truth is hard." He drank. Carol drank, I drank. Derek lifted his glass with a hand that wasn't quite steady. Martha didn't touch hers after the toast. The chief walked to my end of the table one more time. He stood in front of me and the rest of the room receded. "Captain Collins," he said, "I remember your promotion ceremony clearly. You'd just come back from a 12-month special assignment. You'd led a training rotation that set a department record for completion rates under pressure." He paused. The kind of pause that isn't about finding words, it's about choosing which ones deserve to be said. "When I signed your promotion, you said something I wrote down that evening. You said it's not about the rank, sir. It's about the people you get to bring home." He let it land. "Well, tonight you deserve to be recognized." He extended his hand. I shook it. Firm grip, warm palm, 3 seconds. Carol stood and placed her hand on my shoulder. She squeezed once. The kind of squeeze that says everything a sentence can't. "A mother should be the first person to tell the world who her daughter really is," Carol said. She looked at Martha when she said it. Not with anger, with something worse, pity. "I'm sorry yours didn't." I nodded, my throat was tight, my eyes were wet, but I didn't cry, not there, not in front of these people. Not because crying is weak. I've cried at a structure fire at 3 in the morning when a child didn't make it. But because this room didn't deserve my tears. My tears were mine, the same way my service was mine, the same way my name was mine. I turned to Martha. She was sitting in her chair, hands in her lap, fingers interlaced, knuckles white. Her gold earrings had shifted to one side. Her makeup was intact, but her face beneath it had collapsed. The architecture of composure broken from the inside. I kept my head down. "Mom," I said, "for 16 years, the chief didn't." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Nothing." "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm not going to yell at you in front of these people. That's not who I am, that was never who I am." I paused. "But I need you to hear this. I am done being the daughter you wished I was instead of the one I actually am." I picked up my purse from the back of my chair. I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out the challenge coin. I held it for a moment. Felt the weight of it. The Maltese cross on one side, the station crest on the other. Then I placed it on the table directly in front of Martha. "That's from Chief Hayes," I said. "He gave it to me the day he signed my promotion, the one you've never asked about. Keep it. Maybe it'll help you remember who I am next time you introduce me." I straightened my dress. I looked at Emma, who was standing near the door, now jaw working, eyes wet. I looked at Derek, who was watching Emma the way you watch someone you're not sure you know anymore. I looked at the chief. He gave me a single nod. I walked out of the dining room, through the hallway with the green carpet and the dim sconce lighting, through the front door and into the Virginia night. The parking lot was half full. The city lights were soft against a navy sky. The air smelled like river and asphalt, and I could hear the muffled hum of the restaurant behind me. Music, dishes, the ordinary sounds of a place where most people were having an ordinary evening. Emma caught up to me at my rental car. "Rachel, wait. Don't leave like this." I turned. She was standing under a parking lot light, tie loosened, face flushed, looking younger than 30 and older than I'd ever seen her. "Like what, Emma?" I didn't know she told them that. I mean, I knew she said some stuff, but I didn't think it was. I didn't know she made up a whole. "You knew enough," I said. "You told me not to bring up the fire stuff. You told Derek I'd been doing my own thing. You didn't lie as big as Mom, but you carried her bags." "I was trying to protect?" "Protect what?" I said. "Your insurance pitch to her dad?" She didn't answer. Her mouth opened, closed. She looked at the ground, at her shoes, at the cracks in the asphalt. Anywhere but at me. "Emma," I said, "I love you, you're my sister. But I can't keep being the person this family is ashamed of when there's nothing to be ashamed of." She looked up. Eyes wet, chin trembling. "When you're ready to know who I actually am, not who Mom told you I am, you know where to find me, Pittsburgh. Station 47, I'm not hard to find." I got in the car, closed the door, started the engine. She stood in the parking lot light for a long time, watching me pull away. I learned later what happened inside after I left. Emma pulled Derek to a corner of the dining room. Her voice was low, but her words carried the precision of a woman raised by a fire chief's daughter. "You told me she was a drifter, Derek. She's a captain in the Pittsburgh Fire Department. You lied to me." "I didn't lie. I just let her mom handle the story. That is the lie." She walked away from him, back to her father's side. Derek stood alone near the bread station, looking at the empty chair where I'd been sitting. At the challenge coin that still sat on the table in front of Martha's untouched glass. The chief spoke last. He addressed Martha directly, standing, hands at his sides. Mrs. Collins, I respect your daughter, I care for my son, and I wish your family well. But I need you to say something. He paused. I've commanded thousands of firefighters in my career. I can tell you without hesitation that Captain Collins is someone I'd trust with my own people's lives. The fact that you couldn't see that, that's not her failure, it's yours. Martha sat alone at the table after that. The servers cleared dessert plates around her. The white roses she'd arranged 2 hours earlier were starting to droop. She didn't move. She didn't cry. She just sat there holding the challenge coin in her palm, looking at it like she'd never seen one before. I sat in my rental car in the parking lot for 5 minutes before I drove anywhere. Engine running, headlights on. The Richmond skyline framed in the windshield like a postcard from a place I used to live. My phone rang. Carol Hayes. Captain Collins. I wanted to make sure you're all right. I appreciate that, Mrs. Hayes. I'm okay. A pause. The kind that has warmth in it. What you did in there, the restraint. The way you kept your composure while your own mother was. She stopped herself. Started again. That took more courage than anything I've seen at a dinner table, and I've sat at a lot of dinner tables. Thank you, ma'am. For what it's worth, Art and I would be proud to have you at any table in our home. Anytime. You hear me? Anytime. I closed my eyes. That sentence from a fire department spouse, from a woman who understood what service meant because she'd lived beside it for 30 years. That sentence meant more than every word my mother had withheld for 16 years. Not because Carol Hayes was important. Because she was honest. I'll remember that, ma'am, I said. Thank you. I hung up and sat in the quiet of the car. I looked at the restaurant in the rearview mirror one last time. The lights were still on. People were still inside, rearranging the rubble of an evening that had started as an engagement dinner and ended as an unraveling. I put the car in drive, 9 hours back to Pittsburgh. I didn't play music. I drove in silence. And somewhere on Interstate 95 between Richmond and the Pennsylvania state line, I said it out loud to no one. I know exactly who I am to them and who I am without them. The road unspooled ahead of me, dark and straight and mine. 4 weeks later, I was back at Station 47. Morning briefings, shift schedules, training rotations, the routine that held me together the way it always had. Emma called twice. I answered the second time. She apologized, not the full apology. Not the one that reaches all the way back to the root, but enough to crack a door. Derek made me tell him everything, she said. About the fire department, about your deployments, about what Mom's been saying for years. He said if I can't be honest about my own sister, how can he trust me to be honest about anything? They were still engaged. But Emma had set a condition. Derek had to rebuild a relationship with me on my terms. Not Martha's, not his, mine. Martha hadn't called. I expected that. Her pattern was silence. When confronted with a truth she couldn't control, she went quiet. Just like her own mother had gone quiet. She never saw the parallel. I didn't chase her. For the first time in 16 years, I didn't pick up the phone and try to bridge the gap she'd built. For the first time, I let the silence be hers to break. One thing arrived in the mail. A handwritten note on cream-colored stationery. No return address on the envelope. 2 sentences. Written in the steady hand of a man who'd signed 1,000 orders. Captain, your service honors us all. Never let anyone reduce what you've earned. I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk next to my shift schedule. Right where I could see it every morning. I spent 16 years letting my mother's version of me be the only story anyone heard. And then one evening at a dinner table in Richmond, Virginia, a retired fire chief asked a simple question. And I learned that the people who truly see you don't need your silence to be comfortable around you. That's my story. One phone call at 2 a.m, one dinner, and one chief who said what my mother never could. If this story reminded you that your service, whatever kind it is, matters even when the people closest to you refuse to see it, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.